seeing is believing, or hearing is believing. I think, like many other people in this country, I didn't know much about domestic abuse.
Princess Charlotte burst into tears after Queen Camilla took away a treasured gift left for her by Princess Diana. In a moment that's left the UK stunned, Princess Charlotte has reportedly confided in close family that Queen Camilla seized an heirloom passed down from Princess Diana, one meant specifically for her. Sources claim Camilla not only took the item, but coldly declared she had more right to it than Diana's own granddaughter. Why did Camilla target Charlotte? What was the heirloom Diana had reserved for her granddaughter? And why was it suddenly snatched away? Tonight, we uncover the heartbreaking truth behind Charlotte's tears, the explosive family fallout behind palace walls, and what this chilling move reveals about Camilla's grip on royal legacy. You won't believe what happens next. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. UK in shock. Those are the words that race through the headlines, across social media, and into the hearts of royal watchers around the world when an unexpected story broke. One that not only reignited long-held sentiments surrounding Princess Diana, but also tugged at the most sensitive corners of the public's collective conscience. A young girl, only 9 years old, reportedly burst into tears over something most would consider sacred, an heirloom left behind by a grandmother she never got to meet. But what made the nation gasp wasn't the heirloom itself. It was the claim that Queen Camilla, the step-grandmother she shares through her father Prince William, allegedly took that precious item from young Princess Charlotte and insisted it belonged to her. This is not just about jewelry. It's not about a trinket or a piece of ornamentation. This is about legacy, love, and loss. It's about memory and the way it is carried through generations. It's about what is passed down and who gets to hold it. And perhaps more than anything, it's about power and how it gets exercised, even behind palace walls. The events that have unfolded in recent weeks have left Britons bewildered. Many are asking, how could such a thing happen? Could it be that Queen Camilla, already a contentious figure in the eyes of many still loyal to Diana's memory, would strip a young girl of something so deeply personal? Or is this story being twisted into a convenient narrative that fits a broader public sentiment, one that never truly forgave Camilla for the role she played in the tragic saga of Charles and Diana? Let's rewind, not just to last week or last month, but to a moment in time that still hangs heavy in Britain's cultural memory. The late 1990s, when Princess Diana tragically passed away in that fateful car crash in Paris. At the time, millions mourned not only her death but the loss of what she represented: compassion, vulnerability, authenticity. She was known as the people's princess for a reason, and her death marked a turning point in how the public viewed the monarchy. In the aftermath of her death, her belongings, her jewelry, her letters, her personal effects became more than items. They were relics. Tangible connections to a woman who had come to symbolize hope, warmth, and above all, love. Her will, which had been carefully prepared, contained instructions about how these items were to be distributed, especially to her sons, William and Harry, and eventually to their children. Years later, those boys grew up. William became a father. And when Charlotte was born, there were hushed whispers, unofficial reports that a specific heirloom, perhaps a necklace or a brooch that Diana once wore, had been set aside for her. Whether through William's wishes or Kate's quiet assertion, this piece of jewelry was believed to carry Diana's love across time and space into the hands of a granddaughter she never met. For Charlotte, who has grown up in a household that reveres her grandmother's legacy, the heirloom was never just a pretty thing to wear. It was a story, a piece of a puzzle she has been learning about since she could understand words. Her mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has long been praised for how thoughtfully she has introduced her children to Diana's memory. Photographs on the mantle, bedtime stories about kindness and empathy, public outings where the children wave sweetly to the crowds, echoing a poise Diana herself once displayed, albeit under immense pressure. It's in this environment that Charlotte developed a sense of who her grandmother was. That heirloom became not just a gift, but a tether, a link. An unspoken promise that Diana's love didn't die in that Paris tunnel. It lived on, and it belonged to her. So when reports emerged that Queen Camilla had allegedly taken that item and declared it her own, some say she claimed it had originally belonged to her, or that she had a greater right to it because of her standing. It sent a shockwave through the public consciousness. The image was too powerful. A young girl in tears, her eyes brimming not just with sadness but confusion, as the adults around her argued over an object that had come to symbolize so much. Charlotte, who up to this point has been portrayed in the press as bright, cheerful, and strong-willed, was said to have been devastated. Sources close to the family described her as inconsolable in the moment, not because of vanity, but because something sacred had been taken, something that was promised, something that felt like it had always belonged to her. And while Kensington Palace has refused to comment, the silence has only amplified the outrage. In the absence of an official statement, speculation has filled the void. Was this Camilla's attempt to erase Diana's memory? Or was it simply a misunderstanding, a misplaced claim over an item with a murky chain of custody? Did Charles intervene? Did William demand the item's return? Or did the palace, always protective of its internal dynamics, let the moment pass without resolution? To the public, the story matters not just for what it reveals, but for what it symbolizes. It is a reminder that old wounds, no matter how carefully bandaged, can reopen with a single act. For those who lived through the Charles and Diana era, this feels like history repeating itself, another moment where Camilla, whether fairly or unfairly, is cast as the usurper, taking what once belonged to Diana. The timing, too, has raised eyebrows. Just as the royal family has been attempting to modernize its image, ushering in a new generation of royals led by William and Kate, this controversy places them in an awkward position. Do they defend Camilla and risk alienating Diana's enduring fanbase? Or do they quietly distance themselves and risk internal discord? For young Charlotte, the implications go beyond family politics. She's growing up in a fishbowl, where every gesture, every outfit, every facial expression is analyzed. For a girl of her age to become the center of such a deeply emotional and public narrative is both rare and profoundly unsettling. It speaks to the pressures the next generation of royals will inherit, not just in duty, but in memory. They are not just heirs to the throne. They are heirs to a story still very much alive in the public's mind. As the video unfolds, we will delve into the tangled threads of this controversy. We'll explore Diana's last wishes, what she truly intended for her grandchildren, and how Charlotte became attached to that heirloom. We'll examine Queen Camilla's alleged motivations, her history with Diana, and whether this act was personal or political. We'll look into how the public has responded, why this story has caught fire, and what it says about the monarchy's ongoing struggle to reconcile its past with its future. And most importantly, we will explore the emotional heart of the story, a 9-year-old girl who, in a moment of innocence and vulnerability, learned that sometimes even in families, especially royal ones, what is promised and what is delivered are not always the same. Now, let us begin this journey by looking into Diana's wishes, what she left behind, and how she hoped her legacy would live on. Princess Diana's sudden and tragic death in August 1997 shook the world to its core. The outpouring of grief was unlike anything the British monarchy had ever seen or prepared for. Tens of millions mourned a woman who had transformed from a shy kindergarten teacher into one of the most beloved and scrutinized figures in modern history. The world didn't just lose a royal. They lost a symbol of compassion, vulnerability, and unshakable humanity. But for her two sons, William and Harry, the loss was intimate and eternal. In the wake of that tragedy, as the public wept openly in the streets and mountains of flowers piled outside Kensington Palace, another more silent process was set into motion: the division of Diana's belongings and the administration of her estate. Princess Diana left behind a will, crafted with great thought and foresight, updated just 4 years before her death in 1993. The document reflected her concern for her boys and her awareness of the powerful legacy she was building. As part of the will's provisions, Diana's personal belongings were to be preserved for her sons to inherit upon reaching adulthood. But there was another clause, one far less discussed at the time, but critical to the story at hand. A special collection of her jewelry and personal items was to be held in trust. These items were intended not only for William and Harry but, ultimately, for their future wives and daughters. Among these items was a remarkable array of jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, earrings, tiaras, that Diana wore during iconic moments throughout her public life. Each piece told a story. The sapphire and diamond engagement ring that once graced her finger later passed on to Kate Middleton. The Spencer tiara, worn on her wedding day. A butterfly-shaped necklace, beloved for its delicacy. These pieces were not just royal regalia. They were chapters in Diana's life, symbolic extensions of her identity and emotion. What made these items unique wasn't just their beauty or value. It was their deeply personal significance. Diana didn't just wear jewels. She gave them meaning. When she wore a particular necklace to a children's charity event, it wasn't simply to complete an outfit. It was to honor the cause. When she donned pearls during a visit to a hospice, it was to bring dignity to her presence. Her accessories became part of her language, one spoken with subtlety, elegance, and often a deeper message of compassion. It's no surprise, then, that Diana wished these pieces to remain in the family, but not in the traditional royal sense. Rather than allowing the crown to absorb them into its collection, where they could be locked away in vaults or reassigned without emotional connection, she made a deliberate choice to keep them tied to her bloodline, to her sons, and to the daughters they might one day have. In one particularly moving provision of her will, Diana expressed her desire that her personal jewelry be passed to her children, so that their wives may, in due course, have it or use it. But this statement, simple on its face, carried immense weight. It meant that Diana saw her jewelry as more than ornamental. She saw it as part of her ongoing presence in her sons' lives, in their families. It meant that, one day, a granddaughter might wear a brooch Diana once wore on a state visit. That a great-granddaughter might clasp the same bracelet Diana wore while dancing with John Travolta at the White House. This vision became even more poignant after Diana's death. For years, her jewelry was reportedly kept under lock and key in a private royal vault, separate from the crown's official collection. A special Diana collection was said to be created, with each item catalogued, stored, and held in trust for the boys. The public wasn't privy to every detail, but from various interviews, biographies, and leaks, it became clear that William and Harry would one day inherit these cherished possessions and would have a say in how they were shared with their own families. As the years passed and William married Kate, the jewelry began to emerge from the vaults. The sapphire engagement ring became one of the most photographed pieces in modern royal history. Other items began to appear on Kate: earrings, pendants, each time sparking a wave of nostalgia and admiration. It was widely believed that Kate, now Princess of Wales, had access to a generous portion of Diana's jewelry, not only because she was William's wife, but because Diana's wishes were being honored. But it wasn't just about the wives. As Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were born, new questions arose. Would Diana's legacy extend to them? Would Charlotte, Diana's only granddaughter at the time, one day wear something her grandmother once treasured? The answer, by most accounts, was yes. Multiple sources close to the royal household suggested that a specific item had been earmarked for Charlotte. Some claimed it was a pearl and diamond necklace that Diana wore to formal receptions. Others whispered that it was a charm bracelet Diana received from her father, which she treasured deeply. Regardless of the exact item, the consensus was that Charlotte would receive a piece of her grandmother's jewelry, personally designated for her. It would be more than a hand-me-down. It would be a message: you are loved, you are connected, and you are part of a lineage that transcends time. That connection became a quiet part of Charlotte's upbringing. Though she never met her grandmother, she knew of her. Her parents made sure of it. In interviews, Prince William has often spoken about his efforts to keep Diana's memory alive. "We constantly talk about Granny Diana," he once told reporters. "We've got more photos up around the house now of her, and we talk about her a bit and stuff." For Charlotte, those conversations were not abstract. They were real. And the heirloom was the embodiment of those stories. As she grew older and more aware, it became something of a cherished secret, something special that would be hers one day. A gift from a grandmother she never got to hold, but who lived in her heart all the same. But as we will explore in the next section, something happened. Something that fractured that quiet promise and turned it into a point of contention. A royal moment of tension that, if true, has shaken not just the little girl who cried, but a country still holding tightly to Diana's memory. The moment came quietly, away from cameras, outside the grandeur of palaces and the public gaze. It wasn't announced or orchestrated, but rather unfolded as a deeply personal and heart-wrenching moment between a child and her parents. Princess Charlotte, now a growing young royal with a gentle disposition and a keen awareness of the world around her, made a revelation that reportedly left even seasoned royal insiders unsettled. It wasn't about protocol or palace routines, it was about loss, a loss that mirrored a generational wound. It began with a question, innocent and simple. Charlotte had asked about her grandmother. Not the one who sits beside her grandfather, King Charles, at state dinners. The other one. The one she's seen in photographs with a warm smile and eyes full of kindness. the one who, despite being gone long before Charlotte's birth, lives on in stories told by her father and cherished in whispers by the staff who adored her. Diana, Princess of Wales. Charlotte had known since her earliest memories that she was named in part after Diana. Her full name, Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, was more than a royal combination. It was a tribute, a lineage, and a responsibility. The stories her father shared painted a vivid image. Diana, who stood against convention. Diana, who embraced people no one else would touch. Diana, who danced with joy, cried with sincerity, and fought fiercely for her children. It was natural that Charlotte, with her inquisitive nature and emotional intelligence far beyond her years, would feel drawn to this almost mythical figure. But what followed was no fairy tale. One afternoon, during what insiders described as a reflective family moment, perhaps while going through photographs or while preparing for a ceremonial event, Charlotte inquired about a particular piece of jewelry. She had seen it in an old portrait, a delicate necklace, one her grandmother had worn during a notable charity event. To her young eyes, it wasn't just pretty, it was radiant, meaningful, and full of spirit. She remembered her father once mentioning it was part of the collection held in trust from Diana's estate. So, with the innocence only a child can possess, Charlotte asked if she might one day wear it. Perhaps not immediately. Perhaps on a special occasion, maybe a birthday, or when she came of age. It wasn't a demand. It was a dream. A wish to hold something that once belonged to someone who meant so much to her family. But what was supposed to be a moment of joy became one of confusion and ultimately tears. According to a source with direct knowledge of the event, an aide close to the household, the reaction from the family was one of hesitance. It wasn't because the necklace didn't belong to Charlotte. It wasn't because she wasn't deserving. It was because, apparently, that very piece had been recently and quietly confiscated, some claimed, by none other than Queen Camilla. The aide recounted that when Princess Charlotte expressed her wish, her parents exchanged glances. There was a pause. Prince William, known for his emotional reserve but fierce protectiveness over his children, gently explained that the necklace in question was no longer in the vault. That it had been requested, perhaps even demanded, by Camilla, who claimed it had more rightful connection to her as the queen consort and wife to King Charles. To Charlotte, it made no sense. This was not merely a jewel. It was part of Diana's legacy, a private inheritance tied to her father and to her future as a royal descendant from Diana's line. To hear that it had been taken, removed from the family trust without consultation, allegedly under the premise of royal protocol, was devastating. The young princess, usually composed in public, broke into tears. She didn't cry for attention. She cried because something sacred had been taken. Because her connection to the grandmother she would never meet now felt more distant. Because she had been promised, in subtle ways over the years, that a piece of Diana would one day be hers, and now that promise was in question. Witnesses described the moment as heartbreaking. Charlotte reportedly turned to her mother, Catherine, seeking comfort. Kate, who has always championed emotional openness in her children, wrapped her arms around her daughter. The room was silent, save for the quiet sobs of a little girl grappling with the harsh realities of royal life. Realities that often blur the line between personal and institutional. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just the tears. It was the symbolism. For those who had followed Diana's story for decades, it felt eerily familiar. Diana, too, had known what it meant to have her emotional truths dismissed by palace tradition. She, too, had faced cold decisions wrapped in the language of protocol. And now, a generation later, her granddaughter was facing a similar heartache. Behind closed doors, this moment triggered private discussions. William, who has long tried to balance his royal duties with the legacy of his mother, was said to be furious, but restrained. According to insiders, he confronted the issue directly with palace aides. He wanted to know how this had happened. Who had authorized the removal of a personal item from the Diana collection? Was there a paper trail? A formal request? Or had this been a quiet overstep, one that, had Charlotte not asked, may never have come to light? No official statement was released. The palace operates in shadows when it comes to family tension. But within weeks, rumors began to circulate. Tabloids hinted at growing tension between William and Camilla. Not over headlines or public appearances, but over something far more intimate. The inheritance of Diana's memory. This was not about rebellion. William wasn't trying to undermine his father's wife. He wasn't challenging the monarchy. But he was drawing a line. One he rarely drew in public. Diana's personal items were not to be shuffled around like state artifacts. They were family heirlooms. And if anyone had a right to them, it was his children, not the woman who had, fairly or unfairly, come to occupy the space Diana left behind. Charlotte's emotional moment became a quiet rallying cry for those within the royal circle who had always felt Diana's legacy should be protected, not just in spirit, but in substance. For years, the monarchy had attempted to integrate Camilla into public life as a symbol of stability. But this incident, though not widely known outside inner royal circles, cracked the image. If Camilla had indeed taken the necklace, if she had claimed it as her own despite Diana's clear wishes, it wasn't just a faux pas. It was a symbolic act of erasure. That's why Charlotte's tears mattered. They weren't simply the tears of a disappointed child. They were the tears of a girl beginning to understand the complexities of the institution she was born into. The realization that not everything is fair, that not all promises are kept, that sometimes legacy is something you have to fight for, even when it's supposed to be yours by right. The story of the heirloom at the center of this emotional controversy is as complex and storied as the lives of those who've possessed it. In royal circles, jewelry is never just decoration. It's history, power, loyalty, love, and sometimes betrayal, woven into diamonds and gold. The specific piece that sparked Princess Charlotte's heartbreak is one that had been tucked away in the lore of Princess Diana's personal collection. A necklace that symbolized her independence and empathy, gifted during a pivotal moment in her life. The origins of the heirloom trace back to the mid-1980s, during Diana's heyday as the Princess of Wales. It was during one of her humanitarian visits, reportedly in support of an AIDS foundation, that she was presented with the necklace by a donor who had been deeply moved by her compassion. Unlike the traditional diamond tiaras and grand brooches associated with royal lineage, this necklace was different. It had an unassuming elegance, a fine gold chain with a sapphire pendant, encircled by a halo of diamonds. More understated than her famous sapphire engagement ring, yet no less meaningful. Diana wore it several times in public. There are photographs from 1987 and again in 1989 where she paired it with modest gowns, often during events involving hospitals or orphanages. The necklace quickly became one of the pieces most closely associated with her personal identity rather than her royal obligations. It was not lent to her by the crown or part of the Queen's royal collection. It was hers, gifted to her in a moment of genuine appreciation for her work. In private, Diana reportedly referred to the necklace as her reminder, a token that grounded her during some of the darkest periods of her royal life. During interviews with close confidants, it's been stated that she would often wear the necklace on days when she knew she would face tension at the palace or confront pressures she couldn't voice publicly. For Diana, it wasn't about the sapphires or the diamonds. It was about what the necklace stood for: compassion, individual agency, and the validation she received from ordinary people rather than royal hierarchy. After her tragic death in 1997, Diana's personal items were divided with careful precision. In accordance with her will, many pieces were left in trust for her sons, William and Harry, to inherit upon coming of age. Among these were select items she had handpicked for their future wives and, potentially, their daughters. The necklace was one such item. Private documentation, rarely disclosed to the public, allegedly included a note in Diana's own handwriting, indicating that the sapphire pendant be passed to a granddaughter, should either of my boys be so blessed. It was a romantic, almost prophetic notion that one day, her legacy would adorn the next generation of women in her bloodline. In the years that followed, the necklace remained secure in a private section of the royal vault, separated from state jewels. Royal insiders confirmed that there was no question about its origin. It had never been part of Queen Elizabeth II's collection, and therefore did not fall under the authority of the reigning monarch to redistribute. It was personal property, set aside in Diana's will and held under trust until the appropriate time. Yet sometime in the last 18 months, something changed. The necklace, once presumed to be untouched, was reportedly withdrawn from the vault. According to two unnamed palace aides familiar with the jewelry registry, a request was submitted for an inventory reassessment of Diana's personal items. The reason given was reconciliation of undocumented heirlooms in preparation for heritage curation, an innocuous-sounding phrase that sparked little attention. But what followed was highly irregular. As part of this reassessment, Queen Camilla is said to have identified certain pieces which she claimed were mistakenly categorized. One of them was the sapphire necklace. Her position, according to insiders, was that because the necklace had once been worn at official engagements and photographed extensively, it should be considered part of the royal consort's collection, available for use by the sitting queen. This assertion raised eyebrows among many within the inner circle, especially among those familiar with the intricacies of Diana's will. The idea that Camilla, the very woman whose presence in the royal sphere had caused such rupture during Diana's life, would now wear, or worse, claim ownership of one of Diana's most sentimental possessions was almost unthinkable to them. Sources claim the necklace was discreetly removed from the trust without informing Prince William or Prince Harry. It was taken under the authority of Queen Camilla and placed within her rotating personal collection, which is maintained separately from the official crown jewels but frequently used for public appearances. While Camilla has not yet been seen publicly wearing the necklace, its absence from the Diana Trust was only discovered after Princess Charlotte's inquiry. An innocent question that unraveled a decision made without the knowledge of those to whom the item truly belonged. What followed was a flurry of behind-the-scenes communication. Prince William, upon learning of the removal, reportedly questioned not just the legality but the morality of such an act. To him, this was not about diamonds. It was about honoring the memory of a mother whose legacy was already diluted by history and carefully managed narratives. The idea that her belongings, especially those designated for her descendants, could be reassigned without consent was, in his view, both a personal affront and an institutional failure. From a legal standpoint, the situation entered murky waters. While Diana's will outlined her intentions for the distribution of personal property, there are gray areas in royal estate management, particularly when it comes to the distinction between personal and royal assets. The royal vault is technically a secure facility under the authority of the reigning monarch, and oversight of its contents often lies with curatorial advisors who answer directly to the queen consort. Thus, unless publicly challenged, such transfers can occur with minimal oversight. But for those close to the situation, the problem wasn't legality. It was optics. It was emotional resonance. This wasn't about Camilla exercising her royal privilege. It was about whether that privilege extended into rewriting the intentions of a woman who had suffered so deeply within the very institution that now empowered Camilla. Adding fuel to the fire were statements from individuals who had worked closely with Diana. Former butlers, personal aides, and friends spoke anonymously to the press, voicing outrage. One recalled Diana's emotional attachment to that very necklace. Another suggested that Diana had spoken to them specifically about the idea of passing it to a granddaughter. It was a symbol, one said, of everything she hoped would endure: her humanity, her values, her touch. Now, the narrative surrounding the necklace is no longer simply about jewels. It has become a metaphor for legacy. Who controls it, who honors it, and who reshapes it in their own image? For many observers, the act of Camilla claiming the necklace, whether deliberate or administrative, feels like the final act in a long and painful rewriting of history. A history in which Diana's voice, already lost too soon, is now being drowned out by the very institution she sought to modernize. The public has yet to see the necklace reappear. Whether it is being held for a future event, or whether the backlash behind closed doors has led to its resequestering, remains unknown. What is clear, however, is that the damage is done, not in the form of public scandal, because the palace has so far kept a tight lid on any official acknowledgement, but in the emotional toll on a young girl who only wanted to hold something that once belonged to her grandmother. For years, Queen Camilla's integration into the British royal family has been met with a mixture of cautious acceptance and lingering resentment. Despite the monarchy's relentless effort to reshape public perception and rehabilitate her image, there remain fractures that no title or royal duty can fully mend. But among the series of calculated steps Camilla has taken to cement her place within the royal structure, none has caused more private outrage, nor struck such a deeply personal nerve, than her most recent decision. Claiming Princess Diana's heirloom necklace, and in doing so, denying Princess Charlotte a piece of her grandmother's legacy. The public narrative has always been carefully curated. Camilla, portrayed as the quiet strength beside King Charles III, has largely operated in the background, undertaking charitable work and attending official events with an air of diplomacy. But insiders paint a much more assertive, calculated picture of a woman who has steadily consolidated influence within palace walls, leveraging her proximity to the throne to reshape more than just public image. She is reshaping history itself. According to multiple palace sources, the chain of events leading to Camilla's controversial acquisition of the sapphire necklace began more than a year ago. It reportedly started with an internal reevaluation of personal and royal jewelry holdings. At face value, this seemed routine. Jewelry collections within the monarchy are vast, often overlapping between state-owned pieces and personal items inherited or gifted. Every few years, such inventories are undertaken to ensure clarity, avoid redundancy, and prepare for exhibitions or security audits. But this particular audit, overseen in part by Camilla's own staff, deviated from precedent. A senior aide, speaking on the condition of anonymity, revealed that during the course of the audit, Camilla expressed personal interest in a series of jewelry pieces historically associated with Diana. While some of these were technically owned by the Crown on loan to Diana during her tenure as Princess of Wales, others were part of her personal collection, kept in trust for her sons. The sapphire necklace was among them. When Camilla reportedly requested possession of the necklace, citing its previous public appearances and symbolic connection to the royal family, alarm bells rang among longtime staffers who had been close to Diana. Yet palace protocol, as it exists, does not offer many safeguards against such moves. The Queen Consort wields enormous behind-the-scenes influence, particularly when acting on matters of ceremonial import. Jewelry, often considered ceremonial by nature, falls into this gray area, especially if not itemized with ironclad legal documentation. Camilla's team reportedly justified the transfer under the premise that the necklace had become a recognized emblem of the monarchy and, as such, deserved to be preserved within the working collection of the reigning queen. Prince William, when made aware of the decision, was said to be livid. Sources close to Kensington Palace describe a private confrontation between William and Camilla, one that was not raised in public nor discussed with King Charles, but left a chilling mark on their already tense relationship. William's stance was firm. The necklace belonged to his mother, had been set aside for future generations, and should never have been touched without explicit discussion. Camilla, in contrast, is said to have stood her ground, insisting she was simply honoring the continuity of royal tradition. This confrontation marked a turning point. For William, it symbolized a larger betrayal, not just of his mother's memory, but of the trust the monarchy was supposed to uphold in managing her legacy. For Camilla, it underscored her determination to assert herself not only as queen in title but as queen in practice, with full access to the power and privileges that come with the role. More disturbing to insiders was the emotional collateral damage caused by Camilla's move. Princess Charlotte, upon asking about the necklace and learning it had been removed from her grandmother's collection, reportedly broke down in tears. What was intended to be a moment of familial bonding and historical reflection turned into a heartbreaking realization that even Diana's legacy could be altered, redirected, or revoked. Charlotte, by all accounts, is a thoughtful and sensitive child with a keen awareness of her family's history. Her admiration for Diana has been nurtured quietly by both William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales. They have gone to great lengths to ensure their children understand the significance of their late grandmother, not just as a royal icon, but as a woman of compassion, strength, and defiance. The necklace, therefore, wasn't merely a piece of jewelry to Charlotte. It was a connection, a bridge to someone she would never meet but longed to know. For Camilla to insert herself into that lineage, especially via a token so personal, felt to many like a deliberate overstep. The public may never see the full scope of the emotional fallout, but those close to the family say that the incident caused a deep rift. William's private fury was compounded by Catherine's quiet heartbreak, and Charlotte's disappointment echoed through the walls of Kensington Palace for days. But perhaps what's most telling is the palace's silence. Despite growing whispers from royal correspondents and anonymous sources within royal circles, no official statement has been made regarding the necklace's status. Camilla has not worn it publicly, nor has she issued any clarification, retraction, or explanation for her actions. The void left by this silence has only intensified the scrutiny, prompting many to wonder if Camilla's true intentions were not simply about reclaiming a royal artifact, but about reasserting her dominance in a family where ghosts still loom large. In private conversations among royal staff, the move has been described as tone-deaf, disrespectful, and unnecessary. Some have gone further, calling it unforgivable. A former courtier, who served during both Diana's and Camilla's early years in the royal orbit, commented that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed, and Camilla bulldozed over this one. Others see it as a strategic miscalculation, one that threatens to reopen old wounds the monarchy has spent decades trying to heal. And then there's the broader cultural implication. In a post-Diana era, where the royal family is under more scrutiny than ever, Camilla's actions appear out of step with the public's expectation of sensitivity, legacy, and accountability. Many still remember the pain Diana endured. Her battles with mental health, her treatment by palace officials, and the very public breakdown of her marriage continue to cast long shadows. To take something from her, especially something meant for her granddaughter, feels, to many, like history repeating itself in the most brutal way. As for Princess Charlotte, sources say she has not brought up the necklace since that day. But she has reportedly asked more questions about her grandmother, about who she was and why she is remembered with such reverence and sorrow. Her parents, sensitive to her emotional maturity, have begun sharing more stories. Honest, human stories about the woman whose love lives on through them. Perhaps in those stories, Charlotte will find the connection she sought in a necklace now lost to royal politics. For William, the battle is far from over. While he has chosen not to escalate the matter publicly, palace sources suggest that internal discussions are ongoing about how best to honor Diana's memory in a way that can't be tampered with. One possibility being floated is the creation of a Diana legacy collection, an untouchable archive of personal items, letters, and memorabilia, curated by her sons and preserved in perpetuity. Such a move would not only secure Diana's legacy but serve as a quiet but powerful rebuke of the forces that have attempted to revise it. And Queen Camilla? Despite the backlash, she remains unmoved, continuing her official duties with characteristic poise. But beneath that composure, those who know her best say she is acutely aware of the controversy. Whether she sees it as a misstep or a necessary assertion of her authority remains unclear. What is certain is that this incident has altered the internal dynamics of the royal family. Trust has been tested, loyalties have shifted, and a once private pain has now become a matter of royal record. Amid the storm of regal tension, subtle betrayals, and the reshaping of legacy, one figure has stood like a silent pillar in the royal family, Princess Catherine, the future Queen of England, whose poise and discipline have long been praised by courtiers and commoners alike, found herself at the heart of a personal crisis she neither initiated nor sought. And yet, when Queen Camilla seized the heirloom necklace meant for Princess Charlotte, it was Catherine who bore the emotional weight of the moment. Not through angry declarations or public displays, but through a fierce, quiet fury that burned with the intensity of a mother scorned and a daughter-in-law betrayed. Catherine's loyalty to Prince William is legendary within palace walls. From their university days at St. Andrews to the countless royal engagements shared, her devotion has always been clear. But beyond royal protocol and ceremonial grace, what defines Catherine more powerfully is her dedication to her children. She has shielded them from the corrosive weight of fame, guided them through their earliest public appearances, and ensured that they grow not just as heirs to the throne but as compassionate, grounded individuals. The incident with Camilla struck not just at royal tradition, but at Catherine's very identity as a mother and guardian of Diana's legacy. When Princess Charlotte asked about the missing necklace, the one she had been told once belonged to her grandmother Diana and would someday be hers, Catherine's heart sank. She had long prepared for this moment of generational bonding, imagining a day when Charlotte would hold the piece in her hands, bridging past and future. Instead, she was forced to explain, in the gentlest terms possible, that the necklace had been taken. The look of confusion, then pain, on Charlotte's face was something Catherine would not soon forget. Nor would she forgive the woman who had caused it. Inside Kensington Palace, the fallout was immediate. Catherine, who rarely raises her voice even in private, reportedly became uncharacteristically stern during a closed-door conversation with Prince William. Their discussions, usually marked by mutual strategy and calm deliberation, took a somber tone. William, already furious with Camilla, now faced a wife whose anger was born not of royal insult, but maternal instinct. According to a palace aide privy to their private circle, Catherine said simply, "This was for Charlotte. She took something from our daughter, and I will never see her the same again." The path Catherine chose in response was not one of public retaliation, but quiet resistance. She began by canceling a planned joint appearance with Camilla, a rare decision that raised eyebrows but was officially attributed to scheduling conflicts. Internally, however, it was made clear that Catherine had no interest in smiling for photographs beside the woman who had wounded her child. Then came a series of subtle acts of independence. Catherine began appearing more frequently with her own family, including her sister Pippa and parents Carol and Michael Middleton, reinforcing the notion that her true loyalty lay with her children and their future. At the heart of Catherine's reaction was not only a personal grievance, but a broader philosophical divide between the past and future of the monarchy. Where Camilla represents a return to hierarchical dominance, influence won through persistence and proximity to the king, Catherine champions a more modern, compassionate image, one grounded in duty, empathy, and the well-being of the next generation. The necklace incident became a symbol of this clash. It was not just a jewel that had been taken. It was a legacy interrupted. Palace insiders began to notice the distance growing between the two royal women. Their communication, once cordial if not warm, became filtered through aides. During family events, Catherine maintained her composure but avoided prolonged interactions with Camilla. Even in public, subtle cues signaled the shift: averted eyes, reduced physical proximity, a cooling of once-mandated familiarity. Royal watchers, ever attuned to body language, picked up on the tension, though few understood the true depth of the fracture. Behind closed doors, Catherine reportedly found solace in her children. George, Charlotte, and Louis remained blissfully unaware of the full implications of Camilla's actions, but Charlotte's sadness lingered. Catherine spent evenings with her daughter talking about Diana, showing her photos, sharing stories, and reinforcing the idea that her grandmother's love could not be contained in any single object, not even a necklace. Charlotte, moved by her mother's calm resolve, began writing a journal about Diana, drawing pictures and writing imagined conversations with the grandmother she never knew. It became a private ritual between mother and daughter, one that Catherine nurtured with quiet pride. Meanwhile, in her role as the Princess of Wales, Catherine became even more involved in initiatives that honored Diana's spirit. She increased her engagements with charities focused on mental health, women's issues, and children's welfare causes Diana had championed. In one poignant visit to a London children's hospice, Catherine wore a brooch inspired by Diana's jewelry style, prompting whispers among attendees that she was sending a subtle message. Diana's legacy lived on through her, not through the throne or those who had tried to erase the past. William, ever protective of his wife, supported her quiet campaign. He stood by her decision to distance herself from Camilla and began exploring ways to establish a more permanent tribute to his mother that could not be co-opted or claimed. Together, he and Catherine began discussions about creating a foundation in Diana's name, one that would support young people in crisis, particularly those impacted by trauma and family loss. It would be Charlotte's inheritance in spirit, if not in physical jewels. Catherine's silent rage also had another target: the system that allowed such a transgression to occur unchecked. She understood the complexities of royal hierarchy, the ambiguities surrounding inheritance, and the fine line between personal possessions and state property. But she also understood right from wrong. And to her, no amount of royal precedent could justify taking something from a child, especially a child whose only offense was bearing the legacy of a woman whose light still eclipsed those around her. The Queen Consort's supporters, of course, framed the situation differently. From their perspective, Camilla had simply reclaimed an item that had long been part of the crown's public image. They dismissed Catherine's reaction as emotional and unnecessary. But what they failed to grasp was the emotional intelligence Catherine brought to the role of future queen, an intelligence rooted not in dominance, but in connection. Her power came not from commanding loyalty, but from inspiring it. And in this quiet rebellion, she showed just how formidable she could be. By the time autumn rolled around, the full ramifications of the incident had begun to settle within the palace. Staff were divided, courtiers cautious, and the family dynamic irrevocably altered. Charles, caught between wife and heir, reportedly urged both sides to move on for the sake of unity. But Catherine, while respectful, remained immovable. She did not argue. She did not lash out. She simply withdrew, a tactical silence that spoke louder than any outburst. That silence, however, was not passive. It was strategic. In refusing to engage with Camilla directly, Catherine preserved her dignity and denied her adversary the spectacle of a public feud. She let her actions, her continued focus on the children, her charitable work, her unwavering grace, speak on her behalf. And in doing so, she gained something far more enduring than a piece of jewelry: the trust and admiration of a nation weary of palace intrigue and longing for integrity. As the months went on, Charlotte began to smile again. Her journal became a treasure trove of imaginary adventures with her grandmother. George, sensing the change in family dynamics, grew more protective of his sister. And Catherine, though still deeply hurt, found peace in the knowledge that she had turned pain into purpose. In the refined, gilded halls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, power has often moved silently, passed through subtle gestures, quiet decrees, or quiet reshuffling of staff. But when Prince William finally decided to retaliate against Queen Camilla for her brazen theft of Princess Charlotte's necklace and the cascade of emotional wreckage it left in its wake, there was nothing subtle about it. It was decisive. It was personal. And it marked one of the boldest moves by a future monarch in recent royal memory. The decision to strip Camilla's children and extended family of their honorary titles and privileges wasn't made overnight. It simmered beneath the surface for months, fueled by William's growing frustration with what he saw as a deliberate campaign of dominance by Camilla and her inner circle. The necklace incident, while symbolic, was only the most public act in a series of microaggressions and quiet power grabs, the culmination of years of tension that had now spilled over into the realm of irrevocable consequence. Prince William had long been warned about the delicate balance between duty and vengeance. His father, King Charles III, is a monarch built on patience, often too hesitant to act for fear of breaking fragile loyalties within the royal household. But William, shaped by the trauma of his mother's public humiliation and subsequent death, understood that hesitation was often interpreted as weakness. This time, he would not hesitate. The first signs of William's retaliation came in the form of palace staffing changes. Advisors known to have aligned themselves with Camilla's inner circle, particularly those who had pushed for her children to have an increased public profile, found themselves reassigned or quietly dismissed. The public explanation was routine restructuring. But within the palace walls, the message was clear. Allegiance to Camilla's interest would no longer be tolerated within William's domain. Next came the titles. Camilla's children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez, had long enjoyed the informal privileges that came with being stepchildren to the king. While not officially royals, they were afforded elevated status in public events, insider access, and preferential treatment in invitations to state functions. Laura's children, particularly, had been subtly positioned in events that placed them near or alongside Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. It was a quiet campaign to elevate their standing in the public's eyes, to suggest that Camilla's bloodline might someday share a pedestal with Diana's descendants. William found this not only offensive but deeply dangerous. It blurred the lines of royal legitimacy. It risked diluting the Windsor lineage with individuals who, while perhaps personally pleasant, had no claim to royal authority and no role in the future of the crown. In a meeting with senior royal advisors, William laid down the law. All non-blood relatives of Queen Camilla were to be excluded from any and all formal or ceremonial events unless personally authorized by himself or his father. And any effort to include them in royal press materials or publications was to cease immediately. The backlash came swiftly from Camilla's side. Tom Parker Bowles, a well-known food critic and public figure in his own right, was reportedly livid. In private, he accused William of acting out of juvenile spite, insisting that he had never sought royal status but now found himself being punished for his mother's actions. Laura Lopez, more reserved but equally shocked, quietly withdrew from several public events she had planned to attend. According to palace insiders, Camilla herself confronted King Charles in a heated discussion that lasted over an hour, demanding he intervene to reverse William's decision. But Charles, aging and increasingly concerned with legacy rather than conflict, refused to overrule his son. The king, while still deeply affectionate toward Camilla, recognized the precarious position of his monarchy. William was not just his son. He was the future. To challenge him now, in public or private, would risk splintering the already fragile image of royal unity. Charles reportedly told Camilla, "This is William's decision. He will be king, and I will not undermine him." With Charles's reluctant blessing, William proceeded to formalize the restrictions. Camilla's children and grandchildren were removed from the guest list for the next major royal event, the state banquet in honor of a visiting European monarch. In previous years, they would have been seated in a secondary row, their presence captured in the periphery of official photographs. This year, their absence would speak volumes. Behind the scenes, William also instructed the royal household to quietly revise internal protocol. Any reference to Camilla's family in official communication was to be limited to her immediate role as queen consort. Her lineage, her family activities, and her personal guests were no longer to be treated as a part of the formal monarchy. Even her personal staff saw adjustments. Several key figures were replaced by individuals more aligned with William's long-term vision of the royal family. To the public, many of these changes went unnoticed. But for those within the royal inner circle, the transformation was seismic. William had not merely drawn a line. He had redrawn the royal map, removing entire branches that had grown too closely to the throne. And he did so with the calm, calculated precision of a man who had spent his life preparing for leadership. Still, William knew that public perception was as important as private action. To justify the move in the court of public opinion, he leaned into the narrative of protecting his family. Subtle but powerful leaks emerged in the press, stories of Charlotte's disappointment, of Catherine's quiet distress, of Diana's memory being erased piece by piece. While William himself made no public statement, the message was clear. This wasn't about status. It was about justice, about legacy, about ensuring that the children of Diana would not be overshadowed or displaced. Support for William's actions began to build. Public opinion polls showed a sharp increase in his popularity, particularly among younger Britons who viewed him as a protector of tradition and values. Editorials praised his firmness, his unwillingness to be manipulated by palace politics. Social media erupted with hashtags supporting Charlotte's rightful inheritance, with images of Diana juxtaposed with her granddaughter, the past and future united in shared injustice. Within palace walls, the mood shifted. Courtiers who had once hedged their bets between Charles and Camilla's influence now aligned themselves firmly with William. His authority, once theoretical, now had teeth, and he had shown he was not afraid to use it. Camilla, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Her influence over royal events diminished. Her staff reduced. Her family's access severed. It was a humiliation she never expected, not after decades of carefully maneuvering through scandal, divorce, and eventually into the role of queen consort. But this was different. This wasn't public scandal. This was internal war. And her stepson had just claimed victory. Even Charles, though still affectionate, began to distance himself from Camilla in small but noticeable ways. He spent more time in private meetings with William and Catherine. He made fewer appearances at events that included Camilla's family. His concern was not just for his wife's feelings, but for the stability of the monarchy he had waited his entire life to inherit. He knew that if William walked away, if the line between father and son broke, the entire House of Windsor could fracture beyond repair. In private, William confided in Catherine that this was not about Camilla alone. It was about drawing the line now, while there was still time to define what the future monarchy would be. He did not want George, Charlotte, or Louis to grow up in a royal house where influence could be bought with manipulation or proximity. He wanted them to understand that the throne came with responsibility and that defending it sometimes meant removing those who had no right to claim its privileges. The ripple effects continued. Other minor royals, cousins, in-laws, distant relations took note. Those who had enjoyed royal perks without royal duties began to step back, wary of attracting the same attention. The message was received. William would not allow the monarchy to become a social club. It would be a family of duty, discipline, and accountability. By year's end, the new order was unmistakable. Camilla's family was absent from major events. The press, once deferential, now treated them as private citizens. William and Catherine emerged stronger, more unified, and more clearly positioned as the rightful heirs to the crown and the protectors of its legacy. Yet even as the dust settled, questions lingered. Would Camilla attempt a countermove? Would Charles be able to keep peace between wife and son? And would this new direction truly heal the wounds left by decades of royal betrayal? The royal family has never been immune to internal rifts, but rarely have the tensions between sovereign and heir been so palpable, so raw, and so deeply personal as those that unfolded after Prince William's sweeping decision to remove Camilla's family from the royal sphere. Though the monarchy has long maintained a stiff upper lip when it comes to family drama, the emotional fracture between King Charles III and his son could no longer be masked by formal protocol and palace pageantry. The fallout was monumental, threatening to shake the very foundations of the institution they both swore to uphold. What began as a tactical maneuver by William to reclaim his family's dignity and protect his mother's legacy quickly spiraled into a cold war between father and son. The decision to strip Camilla's children of privileges wasn't just a family issue. It was a direct challenge to Charles's authority, a rebuke of his judgment, and a glaring rejection of the woman he had spent decades trying to legitimize in the eyes of the nation. At first, Charles attempted to maintain composure, hiding his disappointment behind a veil of silence. But those close to the monarch reported a growing unease. Behind closed doors, Charles struggled to reconcile two conflicting truths: his enduring love for Camilla, who had stood by him through the darkest chapters of his life, and his paternal bond with William, the very embodiment of the monarchy's future. The king knew that siding with either would risk alienating the other, a devastating prospect for a man obsessed with unity, legacy, and the optics of a stable reign. William, on the other hand, had little patience for what he saw as indecision. To him, the issue was not a mere matter of familial favoritism or personal slight. It was about protecting the sanctity of the crown. The late Princess Diana had endured humiliation and heartache at the hands of palace insiders who had looked the other way as Camilla climbed the royal ranks. William had watched it all as a boy, as a teenager, as a man, and he was determined not to let history repeat itself at the expense of his own wife and children. Their conflict came to a head during a private audience at Windsor Castle. According to insiders familiar with the exchange, the atmosphere was charged with restrained fury. William arrived with a prepared list of grievances, ranging from Camilla's growing influence in state affairs to the perceived erosion of boundaries between royal blood and non-royal associates. Charles, visibly tense, listened without interruption, his hands clenched in his lap. When William concluded by stating that he would not allow his children to grow up in a monarchy built on compromise and favoritism, Charles finally snapped. "Your actions," the king said quietly, "will divide this family beyond repair." "And your inaction," William replied coldly, "already has." The room fell into silence. For a few moments, neither spoke. The implications of that brief exchange reverberated through the palace for days. It was no longer just about Camilla. It was about power, succession, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. Within the royal household, factions began to form. Some senior aides, loyal to the king, quietly criticized William's assertiveness, suggesting that he was acting out of emotional immaturity rather than strategic foresight. Others, particularly younger staffers and those more aligned with Kensington Palace, praised his decisiveness and saw it as a long overdue rebalancing of influence within the royal ranks. The Queen's private staff, once known for their loyalty and discretion, became especially protective of her. They began limiting her public appearances, fearing that questions from the press might touch on the very public sidelining of her family. Some even speculated that Camilla had considered stepping back from public life entirely, though these rumors were never confirmed. In public, the royal family maintained a united front, attending events side by side, smiling for cameras, and speaking in warm platitudes. But seasoned royal observers could see the frost beneath the surface. William and Charles rarely shared extended moments in each other's company, and when they did, their interactions seemed scripted and stiff. Catherine, ever the diplomat, made efforts to bridge the gap, arranging joint family gatherings and encouraging more private communication, but the damage had already been done. The Queen Mother's old advisors, still influential in quiet corners of the monarchy, voiced concerns about what they saw as an existential threat to continuity. They warned that if the rift deepened, it could erode public trust in the monarchy itself. "What the monarchy projects is stability," one former aide said. "If the public begins to perceive the royal family as fractured beyond repair, that image is shattered. And with it goes their purpose." To complicate matters further, international media began to seize upon the story. European outlets, long fascinated by the inner workings of Britain's royal family, painted the rift as a generational clash. The old guard clinging to outdated notions of loyalty, and the young prince stepping into his own authority with modern sensibilities. American networks, already fixated on royal intrigue following Harry and Meghan's exodus, eagerly covered the developments as the latest chapter in the never-ending Windsor saga. Privately, William began to cultivate his own circle of influence, a parallel royal court centered around Kensington Palace. He ramped up his involvement in major causes, launched new initiatives centered on youth and climate policy, and carefully curated a team of advisors whose loyalty was beyond reproach. These were not just moves for public approval, they were steps toward independence. William was not simply waiting to inherit the throne. He was beginning to operate as if he already held it. Charles, though pained by the estrangement, chose not to retaliate publicly. Instead, he focused his efforts on diplomatic engagements abroad and state visits, projecting a sense of regal stability. Yet in moments of solitude, those close to him noted a growing melancholy. He's a man torn between the two people he loves most in this world, one source confided. He knows William has a point, but he also knows what it cost him to finally bring Camilla into the light after decades in the shadows. One particularly poignant moment came during the annual Christmas gathering at Sandringham. The royal family was scheduled for their traditional walk to church, a photo opportunity eagerly anticipated by the public. For the first time in years, William and Charles did not walk side by side. William stood tall and composed beside Catherine and their children, while Charles lagged behind, walking next to Camilla, a strained smile etched onto his face. Observers took note. The symbolism was hard to ignore. The future king had, in that quiet moment, distanced himself from the current monarch. It wasn't just a physical gap, it was an ideological one, and it was growing by the day. In the weeks that followed, advisors worked feverishly behind the scenes to mediate a truce. Proposals were floated, perhaps a partial restoration of Camilla's family's privileges in exchange for William's public affirmation of the queen consort. Perhaps a public joint appearance to signal unity. But William was unmoved. He wasn't looking for optics. He wanted change, real, structural change in how the monarchy operated, who it elevated, and who it protected. The prospect of a formal abdication, while never publicly discussed, began to hover over palace conversations like a phantom. Charles, though still capable, was aging. His reign had begun late. And William's growing popularity, combined with his clear readiness to rule, raised questions about whether a generational handover might happen sooner than anticipated. Even within Parliament, whispers of concern began to surface. Though the monarchy's role is largely ceremonial, its influence on national identity remains significant. If the royal house appeared divided, it could fuel Republican sentiments, already bubbling beneath the surface in parts of the United Kingdom. The question was no longer whether William had the authority to make such sweeping changes. It was whether the monarchy, as an institution, could survive the weight of its